evening. You're listening to Adrenaline Radio, 1680 AM on your dial. I'm Fred Blanchard, host of Adrenaline Motorsports, and we're very fortunate in having an in-studio guest back again. I had to talk him out of, I guess I'm going to have to owe him a dinner this time around the block. Steve Montrelli's back with us again. And so, anyhow, that was... but he's got a lot of good information coming up here about the various aspects related to nostalgia drag racing and what's going on with NHRA, of course, and a couple of other areas that I'd like to expound upon. Some of the things that I'm doing again with this Bonneville project of mine. We'll talk a little bit about that and what's going on and kind of the status of what's happening there. And one of the things that came to mind in reference to dealing with this Bonneville project that I've been working on here diligently and acquiring related parts and components and pieces as to how it all got here. And with that in mind, I started thinking back as to how I met Steve and what he used to do back in the day when he had his own engine shop, and later on, which is, I guess, back in the 70s, he at one time actually had a position with Arius Engines, which was at that time an entity that was in the beginning stages of developing and marketing the new Arius Hemi Chevrolet, which today I'm a proud owner of, and it's gone through its transition, of course. But what again that I wanted to talk about is that ask Steve the trials and tribulations that he went through, and before it even got into the marketplace, and then what he actually had to do, and where he had to go, and how to get it into the market, because it was such a new idea and new concept. And knowing racers as we do, the situation became is that how do you convince a racer to change? And that's kind of the first subject I wanted to touch with Steve. I'm sure he wasn't ready for this, but anyway, I'm going to hit him with it. Steve, welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you here again, and yeah, I'll settle up with you with this dinner.
Good to be here, Fred.
Appreciate it. In the early days of the development of this cylinder head deal, which was very novel, what part of it got you enthused to want to get involved with this thing, and what were the things that you really wanted to do with it? Apparently, you were enthused enough to want to move it forward. How did it begin?
Well, actually, it began. I met Nick Arias when he was in his first business with Venolia Pistons. He was a partner with Venolia, Joe Paisano, which is a very well-known name for all these years. But I was working for Mickey Thompson at the time when I met Nick Arias, and Mickey had just sold his speed shop, and we needed to get pistons and stuff. So I went over to Nick's and Joe's and started buying pistons from him, and that's how I got to know Nick. I knew Joe. And anyways, so I was working with the Mickey car, and a little later on I went and started working for Don Schumacher. And lo and behold, at one of the Indianapolis races, here comes Nick Arias with a double A fuel funny car with a Hemi Chevrolet in it. And it was a steel 454 block with the steel cylinder heads that he had made, which were the Hemi Chevy heads, and they have 3 push rods per cylinder. And this thing was just a gigantic engine and everything. And Nick come over to me, and he asked me if I'd come over and see if I could help them tune the car, because they were just getting started and they didn't know which complete direction to go into. So I kind of went over there after we had qualified Schumacher's car, and in one evening we went through a 55-gallon drum of fuel, just screwing around with the
that was the question I was going to ask. Was this a fuel motor for the first introduction?
Yep. To me, it was a first motor.
Well, I don't recall hearing it running on anything else at the time.
Right.
That's why I asked the question about the fuel. I think that was really the first introduction to the engine as it was. He wanted to go apparently fuel racing, from what I can tell.
Right. That was what it was built for. It was built to compete against the 426 Chrysler hemispherical engine. It was obviously built by Chrysler Motor Company. So he wanted to do something different because there was a lot of Chevrolet guys out there that said, I don't want a 426 Chrysler, a Chrysler Hemi. I would like to have a hemispherical Chevrolet engine. And anyway, so we went up there to run the car over that weekend, and we kind of oversaw something. I got the engine and everything. The people that were there, that were involved with the car, we got it to where it sounded good and said, okay, let's go up and make a run. But lo and behold, what had happened is we made the fuel pump volume and the fuel tank. The fuel tank was too small. We didn't think about that.
The funny car that you were using, Steve, was this the Power Steel car?
No,
it was.
I'm trying to think of the name.
Well, I was wondering.
Dan Gear.
Dan Gear, yeah, it was out of Arizona.
Right, Dan Gear, and
I think that was later on became sponsored by Power Steel. I think.
Well,
it was.
Dan Gear worked for Power Steel in the later years.
I see.
Maybe 15 years ago, and he actually worked at Powers' shop. And that's where he lived, I believe. That's what I was told. And I guess he had a heart attack, and they found him. He had passed away in his office at the shop.
Wow.
About 10 years ago, roughly.
Well, that's too bad.
But anyways, we went to make this one run, and the car left like a rocket ship and got out there about 600 feet, and it blew the blower off it and everything. It just didn't have a big enough fuel tank. You weren't thinking. In those days, you didn't think about the fuel tank. I've had that situation happen twice on that particular car and then another car that I ran.
What, did it just take all the fuel out of the tank, you mean? It just drained it in that short of a time?
Used it up, yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah, well, the tanks were only like 8 gallons then.
Oh, okay.
8, 9 gallons. Now they're 18 or 20. And in those days, nobody knew what was happening, and when something like that happened, it took time to figure out what was going on because you had no instruments or anything on the car that would tell you what was going on. So then later on, when I came back into town about a year later, Schumacher decided he was going to retire, and I opened up my own little shop at my home to start with, and I called it Montrelli Racing Engines. And then about, I don't know.
Who did you do work for at the time you started your own little venture? Who was the people that you did things for?
Well, Dale Poley with the Mickey Thompson car, a couple of the Mickey Thompson cars I did.
So they were still running the Mickey Thompson cars?
Right.
I see. Okay.
And, well, they had stopped for a little bit, and then they started running them again. And then I was doing stuff for Dale Poley and helping him with the cylinder heads, and I had come up with a new piston design. A lot of guys were having trouble with pistons, and we were trying to come up with something new, which I did, and that was very successful for me for a point in time. And then finally all the other manufacturers started making them the way I was making them.
Well, it sounds like to me you brought a lot to the party before you even got started.